In other words, if you've got a patient who's waiting on imaging stat and you know that it's a serious emergency, you have the ability to pick up the phone and call somebody in radiology and say, this patient's been here for an hour and 15 minutes and I've not seen anybody come down here to get her. I'm concerned about it. You could have done that, right?
Yes.
And you never did that.
I don't know.
You don't know if you did.
It's not in the record, but I don't know.
You think you would have?
I may have if I thought there was a delay. I normally would have. I mean, it was a small hospital. There were not, where there were 12 beds in the ER. If she was waiting for a long time, I would assume I would have called.
Okay.
Just my normal practice, but I didn't document anything.
You didn't document it if you did. That's a no.
That's a no. It's not in the record.
And an hour and 15 minutes, if that's in fact what it was. We don't know exactly because there's no documentation of when she left the emergency department, right?
To go to MRI?
Yes.
No.
Have you seen any record that says this is when the patient left to go get an MRI? Anything in the records?
No. It would have been shortly before she started an MRI.
The best we know is at 5:04, Dr. O'Dedra enters a stat order and she's in the MRI tube at 6:31. That's almost an hour and a half, right?
Yes.
So for an hour and a half, we know she wasn't in the MRI tube, but we know that there was a stat order, correct?
Yes.
We know that you could have called the radiology department, but we know there's no record showing that you did.
Correct.
So I have to ask the question, is an hour and a half for a patient like Jessie Adams, is that too long for her to wait for a stat MRI?
Typically, they were about 45 minutes, and that's assuming there was no one else in the MRI.
So I have to ask the question, Nurse Duncan, because you're the person that has to make critical decisions for the patient and to advocate for them. Is an hour and a half too long to wait for an MRI if you're in a serious emergent condition like Jessie Adams?
Yes.
About an hour and 15 minutes. Is that too long?
Yeah. It depends on what's going on in the ER, but I don't remember what was going on. If someone was on the table, we have one MRI machine in the hospital.
You understand, as her nurse, that every minute that goes by, every second that goes by, it is a risk. It is an extreme risk that she could have a more severe injury and a more serious outcome by not getting the imaging study that she needs to get the diagnosis and treatment she needed, right?
Yes.
Was there some other person that should have or could have advocated for her and coordinated between the two departments at that time?
Other than me?
Yes.
Me and the doctor.
Or nurse, or the MRI tech, right?
Or the MRI tech, yeah.
We've seen policies, the jury's seen policies that it's an interdepartmental policy that says there's supposed to be coordination between departments. And you agree with me that if MRI technician Tucker knew that there was a stat order and she thought there was going to be an issue or a problem, or she had a question about this patient's condition, she could have picked up the phone and called you, right?
Yes.
She could have called Dr. O'Dedra, right?
Yes.
Let me ask you this. Have you ever received reports from radiology where they had an emergent patient in radiology who's receiving imaging that had a stat order and they called directly down to the ED and said, you know what? We got something bad. Here's what it is. Has that ever happened before?
Yes, the radiologist would call and notify the physician that there was a stroke or, something like that.
If the radiology department had information, I'm asking you as the nurse who's supposed to advocate for the patient, if the radiology department had information within the first 5 minutes of the MRI that Jessie Adams had an epidural collection or an epidural hematoma,
Yes.
that's the kind of thing that in the emergency department you would expect to get a phone call from somebody, right?
Yes.
And that never happened, did it?
Not while I was there.
So if they knew that at 6:30 and they didn't call out of the floor until 7:26, that's another hour almost, right?
That's about how long it takes to get an MRI.
Right, but if they knew within the first 5 minutes that she had an epidural hematoma, and they didn't call and say, we got an epidural hematoma, that's a problem, isn't it?
Who's they?
Radiologist, the radiology department, whoever's doing the imaging.
Okay.
Do you agree with me?
Yes.
That's the type-
I would assume the radiologist would call. The radiologist sometimes wasn't in-house. They were at home on a computer pulling up images.
What you wouldn't expect is for radiology to have that type of information and wait an hour to call somebody in the emergency room, or wait 50 minutes.
No,
right?
they would call right away.
Because now she's been sitting in the ER for an hour and 26 minutes or an hour and 15 minutes, whatever it is they want to say. Then she's had to wait another hour or 50 minutes to have somebody call down and say, here's what we see on the MRI. That would be wrong, right?
Yes.
Because every second counted for her. Right?
Yes.
Summation of the MRIs that the jury's already seen based upon evidence and testimony in this case, okay?
Okay.
So if you look at the first one, you can see that there was an MRI lumbar spine without contrast between 335 and 408. Do you see that? That was the first one that was in the interrogatory.
Okay.
With me?
Yes.
Okay, here's the second one. This is a brain with and without contrast that was from 429 to 515. Do you see that?
Yes.
Setting aside the hospital's position now that it was actually later. Okay? Here's the next patient. This is Jessie Adams. She's in the tube from 6:31 to 7:26 if we're to believe what the medical record says.
Okay.
Any reason to dispute that number?
No.
And then the next patient is someone who went in the tube after her from 7:48 to 8:34. See that?
Yes.
And then is there a fifth patient? This is a brain with and without contrast that began at 8:57.
Okay.
Your testimony to the jury is that in your experience, it's about 45 minutes to get somebody to an MRI tube, even if it's a stout order. Even if every second counts, right?
Yes.
Okay. If you, and I'm not very good at math. In fact, I was told there was no math, and there's math all the time. Here's what, if you were actually to do the math and were capable of doing the math, which I'm not, here's what the math is on the amount of time in between these MRI studies. Do you agree with me that at least with respect to these 5 patients on this particular day, didn't look like 45 minutes for anybody? It was actually an hour and 16 minutes for Jessie, right?
Yes.
Do you agree with me that at least with respect to these patients, they certainly were able to get in and out of the MRI machine on March the 21st of 2019 in under 30 minutes?
Yes. Are these when the order was placed or when the MRI started?
No, this is the amount of time in between the runtime. So
Does it
finishing
show
one
when
patient,
the orders were placed?
I'm sorry?
Does it show when each of these had the official order?
Well, this is a demonstrative that we created based upon when the tubes were open and then when they were occupied.
Right, but if the first one, for example, was they started at 3:35, do you know when that was ordered?
I don't know. Why would it matter?
Because it may have been from the time of order to the time of MRI completion was 45 minutes to an hour.
Well, what if the order was at 3:34?
That would be very fast.
Yeah. You want to see the order?
Yeah.
Okay. This is a record you're familiar with, right?
This is the order you just showed me.
Well, it's not. It's an order that was shown to you by the hospital's counsel, and you said you're familiar with it, right?
No, I said it looks familiar as most orders. This was the same system I used for years.
Here's the order, 334. Is there another explanation that you have?
They were already down there and they needed the order.
Right. But the real issue is between 4:08 and 4:29, 21 minutes expended, and they had another person in there.
Okay.
See that?
Yeah.
Last question. If that demonstrative is correct, if those times are correct that were supplied to us by the hospital, and these other patients got in there within 21 to 25 minutes, Can you explain to the jury why it took Jessie Adams an hour and 15 minutes to get in there?